Hello, this is Jed Brewer with the Below the Line Club and Study Groups. It's really great to have you on our webinar today. We're going to be talking about two topics. One is self-checkout. How do we implement it? How do we get it right when we do? And then the second topic is going to be on credit card processing and what are ways that we can save dollars with it. So really pleased to have three of the best looking men, I think, in the industry joining us here today. Two of them are with Paragon Solutions, and they're going to be talking about self-checkout. One is Mike Lawshe, who's president of Paragon Solutions, and the second is Austin Burns, who's head of business development for them. And Paragon is a design company, and they also do a lot of branding work in our industry, helping people get their brands right. And self-checkout really fits into both the design of the store as well as the brand and what message you're conveying to your customer. We're all desiring greater speed of service, and it's something that we want to execute on going forward. So really pleased to be able to hear what they're going to talk about. And then after that, Casey Cook, who's founder and president of PIX, will be sharing 3 credit card processing industry secrets. So some questions that our processor doesn't really want us to ask, and also getting into e-commerce tips, and then what fuel brands out there have the most competitive fees. So we want this to be an educational webinar for you. We'll spend an hour of our time here today. If you have questions, I have you muted, but would encourage you to type that question into the dialog box that is there in this GoToWebinar framework. I will be able to see that, and I'll try to relay your question on to our presenters at an appropriate time so we can get your questions answered. So we'll have a little bit of back and forth as we move throughout this. So with that introduction in mind, Mike and Austin, I'm going to turn it over to you at Paragon Solutions to talk with us a little bit about implementing self-checkout and getting it right.
Wow, what an intro. Thanks, Jed. I really appreciate it. I wasn't ready for the 3 best looking guys in the industry thing. I was going with the good, better, best beard in the industry, but we'll take what we can get. So, hey, good afternoon. I appreciate the time. You know, one of the things about design that I really appreciate is it's about creating an experience for the customer and thinking beyond. And when we get something like self-checkout, you say, well, you know, what's that got to do with design? It's really easy. You take the NCR unit and you put it in there, and it's relatively easy. But it's not if you really drill down and you really look at it from what's the customer experience? What does the customer see, feel, touch as they go through their transactional process? So today we wanted to look at a couple things. We wanted to look at more than self-checkout, and we're broadening the scope of this discussion because everything affects everything else. You know, there's so many pieces in addition to the self-checkout that you really need to take into account for. So we're going to look at a broader bit of technology or broader sense of what the customer is doing. We're going to look at the best practices for that and how you integrate it into your existing stores and into new stores, and kind of the thought process of what you're going to go through. And then we're going to pull it all together. So with that, at Paragon, we have a philosophy, and it's designed and done right. We don't do Band-Aid solutions. We don't just throw things in. Because, as I said, it is more than just design. It's creating an experience. If the experience for your customer is good, then they will buy more. It's really that simple. And so we take that approach. You know, and also when we look at different things like self-checkout, you know, we're very cautious and very analytical on the front end. We try to look at it from what's not only what's existing best practices, but what's future, what's changing in the industry. So the ready, shoot, aim is just to say, you know, don't just slam it in there. Take a step back, look at the big picture, and then go from there. That's what Paragon does, and this is not really a shameless plug. What it is to show you in these 7 phases of design for us. The first 2 phases are analytics, looking at the data, whether it's an IMST report or looking at the demographics of that individual site, or looking at your you know, existing floor plans, whatever it is. We're analyzing the data before we draw anything. So it's not as easy as just plug and play. That's really the the goal here is to broaden that perspective and to have you understand that there is a lot of bad self-checkouts out there. And I say that because it's based on the information that people had, and they would take a unit not unlike what you see here, and they would just put it in with no understanding of what's around it or what that customer experience is. So when I look at this, I'm going to ask you to write down, there's homework here. I want you to write down the 6 things that I'm going to challenge you on, whether it's going back and looking at your existing self-checkout or if you are looking at developing a self-checkout. Number 1, what's the hierarchy of importance? And by that, I mean, is self-checkout the first option you want your customer to perceive, or the second, or the third? Because in the design world, you create that hierarchy of importance by the way you lay it out. So more on that later. Second thing is I want you to ask yourself, what is the customer service approach? Are you doing self-checkout to just reduce labor? Or are you doing self-checkout to elevate the experience by having a customer service person kind of surrounding that area and giving a chance to really talk to them as opposed to just run the register? So what's your motivation for doing the self-checkout? The third, and this is where it gets really complicated to me, is to look at the other related traffic flows. Things like pickup, delivery, order, self-checkout, of course, drive-through, and the food service lines. Many times those lines and the queuing, the lines, and the process, they intersect, and not necessarily in a good way. So I want you to always look at, the customer that is at the self-checkout and queued up behind, at the food service queued up behind. How are you working drive-through? And I want you to look at it from both a back of the house, meaning your employees, how are we reducing steps, and front of the house, are we looking at the customer flow? The fourth thing I want you to understand and look at is recognize that it just takes a little longer to execute self-service. So in doing that, are you giving them enough space for the pre-checkout, post-checkout? Are you giving them baskets or carts to facilitate? Stand there and watch, watch what's going on, and just recognize that the customer experience is paramount here. So take a look at that. The fifth thing, I want you to understand that there's demographic influences. Is this an urban market? Is it a rural market? What's going on, and how does that affect, your overall customer experience? The sixth thing I want you to look at is technology integration. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for what's going on? Are you ready for self-checkout? So with those 6 things, I'm going to turn it over to Austin to take a look at some of those analytics that come into play, some of the data, and this is by no means all of it, but take a look at some things that influence these decisions.
Yeah, so I think that when we're looking at self-checkout, we can't just be looking at it singularly, right? We have to look at it from a macro perspective and understand what other opportunities we have that are out there to make your brand stand out, ways to differentiate yourself. So we pulled together, we're just going to show you 3 slides of data that are really critical right now, and it's from a Blue Dot survey that was just released, and it's really captivating information. The first one would be that, Mike, can we turn over to that first one? Sorry. So food service initiatives are really paying off right now. As you can see, 6 in 10 are now considering C-stores when hungry for fast food. And that's placing them nearly on par with popular QSR brands. That's a wow statement. That's kind of, hey, that makes you think about things a little bit, right? The next one, imagine yourself, I run through this all the time, on a day. I'd say every time I get gas or I have to go I visit the local racetrack, and I have my kids. May have been late in the morning, still hungry. Grab some gas, and if I had the ability to go through the drive-through and grab a quick cup of coffee and maybe a little breakfast, that would be a staple for me. And the data backs this up. 60% of consumers are indicating that they visit more if there was a drive-through curbside pickup. I mean, these are really things to think about. And your food doesn't have to be exquisite either. It just has to be, I mean, honestly, pretty good, right? And so, you know, we're trying to increase foot traffic, we're trying to increase visits, and these are really things to really start taking into consideration. And then the last one, obviously more focused on today's topic with us, but you know, this just shows us that self-checkout is here. It's something that's actually much more expected with the consumer, and you know, they expect to see and have the option of non-traditional checkout experiences, whether that's mobile app ordering, third party delivery, whatever. And then, but 66, you know, the majority of them say self-checkout would be the preferred and one they're most interested in. So these are really just kind of some data points that really drive how we look at that. Is it the answer for everyone? No, it's not. It's just what Mike was talking about. We have to be very we have to be very diligent in how we evaluate the circumstances in which we put these in, and it can't be an afterthought. But the data and the consumer is expecting these sorts of things. So just taking this back and really looking at it and just strategically thinking about it, you know, like I said, self-checkout is not a new concept. It's expected. If you haven't already, you know, the takeaway right here is you know, food programs, right? That's a big ask, but just, you know, start looking at it. Maybe start developing your own food program service. There's some market share to be had. And then consider implementing the drive-through. I know that that's a huge capital ask, but you know, the risk is worth the reward at this point, along with curbside pickup and other options. And then I think it goes without saying, on the loyalty and mobile app side of things, people are more ingrained in, we are a technology-driven society and we are always on our phones. Another data point showed that over half of people are looking at their phones while they are pumping gas. We've got to capture that audience, and we've got to pull them into the stores and give them a quality experience.
So everyone on this call.
I remember visiting with a retailer once, Austin, and they said, boy, as I was conceptualizing self-checkout, initially it was, well, how do I save labor costs? But as I went through the process, I realized it's not about saving labor costs, but the reason I'm doing this is to enhance the customer experience. That caused me to pause and think a little bit. I'm curious what your perception is on that comment.
That's a great question, a great comment, Jed. I think that we justify and look at self-checkout as a way to save on labor. But in reality, I don't think that that's the key mechanism here. You know, yeah, you get some efficiencies there, but really, you know, if you don't have a culture to support that in your brand, and you know, people still need help at a self-checkout. We still have age-restricted items that have to be put through self-checkout. It's a brand enhancer that still requires and warrants having a physical body there to be a part of the customer experience and to help when needed. But you know, that's not the first thing that we look at, to your point. So that's a very good comment. Thank you.
You know, when you look at what Austin just shared, everyone on this call is going to treat each one of those data points differently. Some will embrace the drive-through, some will embrace curbside, some will embrace the loyalty pre-orders and mobile apps. So how can you have a singular solution for everyone on this call when everyone's different? And that's the key. That what we're saying is that how you mold this and how you put this solution together is part of your brand solution. It's part of how you present yourself. Jed, you're absolutely right. It is an opportunity, if you take advantage of it, to raise the bar as far as the customer experience. So, do you hire the same people?
Austin, did I lose Mike?
To facilitate that customer experience? Do you move the cashier, minimum, like a Southwest Airlines kind of person with personality oozing out, to shake it up a little bit? Yeah, you probably do. So everything affects everything else. And that's really what we're talking about today, is there is no singular answer. There is no silo when it comes to that. So as far as self-checkout, you can look at this one here is Cumberland Farms. We did not do this particular design, but I think it's a great talking point. When you look at the choices that they made, center of the store, they've got pickup on the left, they've got self-checkout front and center. That speaks to what I said about the hierarchy of importance. They put self-checkout very high in their level of importance. But what they didn't put very high is things like pickup or drive-through, because it can't really be facilitated through this design. So again, they're picking what's important to them and they're designing around what's important to them. I think they did a fair job of the amount of space dedicated. But again, I would, instead of having people walk in to this, I would probably have put it over to the side a little bit and present, instead of the 3 checkouts, I would present product to sell or something different. That's just me. But I think it's a really good starting point, a really good representation. And I talked earlier about, the different types of stores. Is it an urban store? Is it a regular convenience store? Is it a travel center? And the solutions are different. So when we look at travel centers, for example, in this case, this is one that we did, Port Fuel out of Savannah, Georgia. We actually used the self-checkout as the divider between the diesel presentation and the traditional convenience presentation. And so both are drawn to it, and it works for both. Obviously, there's things with diesel transactions that make it more complex, but they're close by. So at any rate, you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? How are you trying to pull it together? And then work in all those traffic patterns that we talked about. We're going to go through very quickly just a case study and how this particular company, Oak Grove Market, actually just won Best New Store Design winner. And I think the reason that they did is because they took all these things that we're talking about and they prioritized. In the design, as we went through the design process, we did that hierarchy of importance very clearly. We did look at self-checkout. They weren't ready. Remember, the 6th thing I said was, are you ready? They weren't, but we made provisions for it. And I'll show you that in just a second. But the key here is strategy. As Austin said, creating food programs not easy, drive-through is not easy, self-checkout's not easy. None of this is easy, but it's all important. So you have to have the right strategy. I love when George said that. So just real quickly, when you look at the left, you see the prominence of the drive-through. That was very important. In fact, it was the first thing they talked about, making it, because it's more of a neighborhood. Their food program is extraordinary. So the drive-through was incredible. And you also see the seating area is kind of up towards the street. That was very prominent. They wanted that to be a big deal. And so what was their feature? Well, they built it around this amazing pizza oven. But the drive-through, as you can see, we fully cover it. We bring in the technology for, is it a pre-order? Is it a order on site? But that's what they wanted the focal point to be, is that pizza oven, that food program. And as you go down to the left where it says order here, that's the pickup station and the curbside. So you've got curbside over on that side, and then you've got the traditional checkout over on the other side. So if you're skipping the line to order online, that's great. You can either go through the drive-through or you can pick it up. So I know my time is short, and I want to be make sure that we give CJ the time he needs. But the key here, if you go back to the 6 points that I brought up, it's everything is related to everything else. Be very intentional about creating that priority, that hierarchy of importance, and think not how we can just Band-Aid and throw it in there, but how can we elevate the experience of that customer to a whole different level? Because that's really what you're doing. You're offering a whole new service. It's, the technology is a part of it. And when NCR and the other guys sell you that piece of equipment and they say, okay, just put it right in there and, done. Well, it's done for them because they accomplished their goal, and that was to sell you the piece of equipment. But your goal should be to elevate the customer experience. And so if there's anything that you take away from this presentation today, it's not easy, but it's doable, and it's all about the customer and elevating that experience. So Jed, I don't know if you wanted to take questions at the end or if you wanted to take them now.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah, one question that came to mind, you said your 6 points with technology integration. You said, are you ready? What does ready look like?
Wow, there's actually different levels of ready. It's easy to put the program in to run self-checkout. That's not even the hard part. But have you integrated your loyalty program into it for pre-order or web order, that kind of thing? I think there's different levels that you can be in order to be ready. But if you're not ready and you put something out to your customer, that's not improving the customer experience. That's actually a negative. So that's why I wanted to make sure that you are ready for it. From a design standpoint and an operation standpoint, are you ready?
And then I know there's different options out there for improving the speed of service. I can think of like the full Amazon Go technology, cameras everywhere. You walk in, you got the self-checkout kiosks. You talked about drive-through, skip the line technology, which is sort of a hybrid of stuff, and we can name others. I know a question for many retailers is, well, what technology is right and which one do I adopt? Do you have any insight in there as you look out into the future?
Right, it's kind of the same thing that we were just talking about. There is no singular answer. You've got to establish, and what this slide really shows is what's your brand promise? What are you offering to that customer that is uniquely different from the guy down the street? And so as you make those choices, that's what's going to determine your design and why you're going to look different and be different from your competition.
I think the commentary there too is those autonomous stores are good for specific uses. The bottom of apartment complexes, the transaction is key there, right? The in, the out, the efficiency there. There's no relationship there. There's no experience there other than how easy it was, right? And so going back to what Mike said, it's understanding your brand and what you want to reflect. Are you a community brand that wants to say hi to everyone and, make sure they feel important when they walk in the door, or are you strictly transactional? Because those are two different experiences in and of itself. And the technology is tough. It's hard. And you've got to be specific with it. And you've got to understand it very well. So those are two different ways to go, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking time to share from your expertise. For the audience, if you have any other questions, again, feel free to type them in and we can come back to them at the close of the call. But for now, I'm going to switch over to Casey Cook, who's with PIX. So after showing you guys a bunch of warm and fuzzy slides and talking about how do we best serve the customer, we're going to talk about one of our least favorite topics, which is the pain point of credit card processing fees. And Casey, so really glad to have you here with us to help give us some ideas on how we might be able to save some money on one of our biggest operating expenses out there, which is our credit card processing fees. What are those industry secrets?
Oh boy, Jed, credit card guys showing up is like the random guy at the family reunion who shows up. you're not sure if he's actually related at all, and he gravitates over towards you, and then he takes the last piece of cake. So that's the traditional stigma here, but we're showing up here today. We're bringing our Ancestry.com report with us, and we're bringing 3 different desserts today to share with everybody. So we're hoping to dispel some of the misconceptions about card processing, show a little bit under the hood, and straighten things out. Jed, can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, good. Well, there's 3 takeaways I want us to look at today. One is questions your processor really doesn't want you to ask. 2, fuel brands with the most competitive fees. And 3 are e-commerce tips for commercial fuels and home heating oils. So let's jump right into it. Takeaway number 1, questions your processor really doesn't want you to ask. So write these down, but I'll summarize them for you at the end. So to get into that, the first question would be, would you clarify my fees? What I put on the screen here for you to see is 2 different forms an agent submits. So these are 2 separate examples of 2 different companies of a form an agent submits when completing your merchant application. So in your mind, you're paying a very simplified fee, but as you can tell, there's lots of fields for the agent to fill out. Let's take a look at what some of those fields are. First up, you're given a choice of interchange plus or a flat tiered blended pricing. We'll get into that in a little bit. We'll look into that in branded fees, but there's a bunch of fields on here. I'm trying to figure out what is going on here. So I see a spot for an authorization fee and an item fee. What could those be? Or an address verification fee, the zip code enter. I thought processors wanted you to incorporate this, but they can set a fee for this as well. And what about PIN debit? So there's an option to set a PIN debit based fee as well. So as you can see just from the screen itself, that when customers think they're paying 5 cents a transaction, in a lot of cases, the card processor may be able to say with a straight face, yeah, you're paying 5 cents for an approved transaction. But in addition to that, there's an item fee, which says, hey, every time there's an attempt at a transaction, we're going to charge this 5 cents, whether or not it was completed. So that's in addition to an authorization fee. Or on that same transaction, there could be an AVS fee if you're typing in your zip code out at the pump. So that's an additional 5 cents. But what if you're also typing in your PIN debit fee or your PIN debit on your debit card? There's an additional 5 cents on top of that. So where you may hear, oh, you're paying 5 cents a transaction, in reality, that 5 cents could actually be 20 cents a transaction. These card fee programs are designed to be confusing. And the reason being is this is how the credit card industry works when it comes to interchange fees. You'll see that in just a minute. There are dozens of different types of fees. And so the processors who manage this, for the most part, have lots of levers and controls they can push to create fees when they want to give the appearance on the front end that they're charging 3 cents a transaction or 4 cents a transaction or 5 cents a transaction. So would you clarify my fees? And let's break down the application is a great question for your processor. And I guarantee you they don't want to see that question. The second one is, how much have I paid in PCI non-compliance in the last 12 months? Some of you here are multi-site operators, and this is a big, big pain for you. Some of you may just as an individual store, as an operator or dealer stores, you deal with this question all the time. You try your best to be in compliance and you're getting consistent fees, or maybe you're not even aware that you're getting fees. So even on this application here, you see there are 2 fields for PCI compliance. So one is a PCI protection fee and the other is a PCI non-compliance fee. So does that mean to tell me that they can set the PCI protection fee that keeps you compliant, but then also set the PCI non-compliance fee? If you're not compliant, that doesn't seem right. And they get to set both of those fees. We see this when it comes to an unbranded store, particularly. You don't see this case with branded stores, but on an unbranded store, 75% of the merchant accounts that we review their statements, they're paying PCI non-compliance fees. And annually, this is anywhere between $400 to $1,500. And typically you're going to see somewhere in the $30 to $75 non-compliance fee, and you're not even realizing it because it's hidden somewhere on one of your statements. So if you ask your processor, how much have I paid in PCI non-compliance fees, they'll tell you how much you've paid in the last 12 months, if you've paid it at all, where most of you think you might be compliant. These, again, are fees set by the processor, so they're not going to be happy with this type of question. The third question.
What do I do about it? Let's suppose I am paying a lot of PCI compliance, non-compliance fees.
Tell me that one more time, Jed. I turned down my speaker.
Oh, I was saying, what do I do about it? Let's suppose I ask that question and I am paying a lot of PCI non-compliance fees. Is the answer get compliant, or is there something I can do with processor?
Yeah, so every processor pretty much uses one of two companies for PCI compliance. These are, there's a self-assessment questionnaire, or for short an SAQ, that you have to fill out, and then your store has to do a scan. Larger retailers, operators who are on this phone, you probably have someone dedicated to doing this, and it's a pain to do every single year. But the self-assessment questionnaire, one that most retailers don't know is if you have multiple stores, you can combine them together to do one SAQ for all of your stores. We've also worked closely with those companies to reduce it, because that can take you, Jed, that can take you 30 minutes to an hour on some of these questions. And there are a lot of in the weed questions. So what we've worked with PCI compliance teams is to reduce that specifically to a C store, where most C stores are using an NCR system, a passport system, or a Verifone system. And so the questions could be much shorter. Our SAQs take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And the scan is just a process. You need to go in, log in, do that. That's something that we can help with folks as well. We don't have to be your processor to help you with that, but it's more of a headache of taking the time to sit down and do it than it is the actual intimidation of doing it, Jed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question number 3 to ask your processor is, how much has the processor increased my fees since my contract had ended? So there are 3 steps to the life cycle of a merchant for most processors. You have the contract period, the expiration period, and the increase period. And so to give you a special rate, a lot of times an agent or an account executive at a big processor may need to secure your special rate via contract. And the way that these processors work is the day that contract goes out, it either becomes a house account, or the agent or account executive is encouraged to renew the contract. If the merchant does not renew the contract during the expiration period, the processor typically automatically begins marking up those fees month over month, or quarter over quarter, over year, basically until the merchant cries uncle. And this is a common practice among all the processors. And that's why we tell customers, be wary of a contract. If you need a contract to get special pricing, there's typically mechanisms that are being pulled to increase those rates. So, and a lot of times the agent or the account executive who signed your account up really has no control over it. It becomes the control of the processor. And that's why they incentivize the account executive or agent to renew the contract. So those are 3 questions that you'll want to ask your processor to see how much you're paying in unnecessary fees you may think you're not paying. 1, would you clarify my fees? 2, how much have I paid in PCI non-compliance fees in the last 12 months? And 3, how much has the processor increased my fees since the contract ended? Okay, we got to keep on moving here. Takeaway number 2, we want to look at some fuel brand card fees. So 2 basic questions are, why are branded card fees so expensive? 2, which brand is the least expensive. So before we dive into that, I'm gonna do a quick recap of credit card processing fees 101. We presented on this topic last year, so if you'd like to know more specifically about this topic, we can send you copies from last year. But here's how it basically works. Card brands like Visa charge a specific fee for every transaction, depending on how the transaction is done, the card that is presented, and the point of sale that is used. There's a whole gigantic table of fees that you could review. Any transaction could have dozens of options for which fees would apply. So the processor's job is to charge a fee structure that covers those fees and for the processor to make income. There are 2 primary ways you'll see this in the convenience store world. One is pass-through fees, where they pass through the card brand fees and they've added a fixed amount on top of it. An example of this would be pass-through plus 6 cents a transaction. The other method is you blend all the interchange fees together for all the different card types and present one or a few different types of fees that would be charged every time. It's a whole lot easier to understand. It's a lot more clear for the merchant. But what you get with the clarity, where you don't have all those hidden fees like we were talking about before, you end up paying a lot more for. So a blended fee, an example would be 2.5% and 15 cents a transaction. And let's say they charge that for a debit, credit, and fleet card across the board. So which one of those is better? Pass-through fees are better for you. What I've taken here is a screenshot from Visa's website of interchange fees. This is a quarter of one of the pages it's about 50 pages of interchange tables. So if you're really interested and want to get in the weeds of what actual interchange fees are, and you're having insomnia late at night, go to Visa's website and check out their interchange fees. But a quick snapshot of an example. The most common card at a C-store is a debit card. Across the board, average all the C-stores together, 50% of all transactions are going to be a debit card. And the most common debit card charge is the regulated check card. 0.05% of the transaction, add 21 cents. So the reason they have 2 different sizes or 2 different types of fees are small banks who issue debit cards are exempt from some of the regulated fees, so they can charge a little bit more for debit cards. Big banks, which is going to be about 70% of all debit cards that are issued, think your Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, all those would fall under the regulated category. So let's take an example right here. Let's say that at the pump, we had a $50 transaction. It was a debit card, so the interchange qualification is going to be 0.05% and 21 cents. The total interchange fees you're going to pay on that transaction is 25 cents. So if you have a processor with a pass-through program, they're going to pass along that 25 cents, add their 6 cents on top of it. So the total fees are going to be 31 cents. Your total effective rate, or another way to say that is your fees as a percentage of your sale, is only 0.61%. As you know, as a C-store, roughly across the board, most people are paying about 2%. You'd really want 0.61% as your effective rate. Your processor on that makes 6 cents for the transaction. Now, if you take a blended rate program and they say for that debit card and all debit cards, regardless if it's regulated or not, we're going to charge 1.3% and 14 cents. So they're not passing along these fees. They're just saying, take the $50 and multiply it by this and add 14 cents. Total fees there are going to be 79 cents. So you have an effective rate of 1.58%. And the processor fee income, you take their 79 cents and you take out the fees that they absorb, the 25, they made 56 cents on that transaction. So as you can tell, 99% of the time, pass-through is going to be a better option for you. There are some unique cases where that blended program works to your advantage, but 99% of the time it's not. So which program did the brand use? Well, as you guessed it, all of the major card brands utilize blended pricing. They take Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, and they say, no matter what type of visa shows up, we're going to charge the same amount. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a comparison for an actual C-store. So what we did is we took real data from one of our C-stores from 2022. The store did about $2 million in sales, or about $160,000 of credit cards a month. They did about 70,000 transactions in a year, or about 5,700 transactions a month. They averaged $28 a ticket. And just for reference, since this is gas stations, this site sells about 60,000 gallons a month. So with that in mind, if we took that store and it wasn't a PIX store and we made it potentially all the different brands, how would everything shake out? Well, if you take all of the branded fees, what you're looking at here, we'll break this down in just a minute, but from a big picture here, this store did about 50% of its sales in debit cards, which is very common. All the other bank cards made up about 48% of transactions, and fleet transactions made up about 2% of the transactions. So think middle of the road C-store. This is not a truck stop where the fleet fees would be a lot higher, or the percentage of sales would be a lot higher. Take fees for debit, all the other cards, and fleet fees and their network fees. We're not including all the managed network fees, even though they all charge different things for the MNSPs. Total fees in a year for this PIX store was 1.72% effective rate. You've got your top quartile here of brands, Marathon, Valero, Exxon, and you got your bottom quartile here, BP, Chevron, Sunoco. In this particular case, these three were all pretty similar in the fees that they charge. But if you mixed up the cards a little bit, because they all charge a little bit different blended rate, some of these brands may change positions, but by and large, this is how a lot of C stores would shake out. So what are some takeaways from this? What do I take away from Sunoco would have been $9,000 more this year? Takeaways from this: if you're considering changing a brand, if you're at the end of a branded contract, or you're considering going branded, or you're considering debranding, here's some factors we think you should pay attention to as you evaluate. This isn't the whole pie. This may be just a sliver of the pie, but it's large enough numbers that you want to consider it. Debit cards, for the most part, account for 50% of sales. Chevron has the highest debit fees. Credit cards, BP, Amicos, Visa, and MasterCards. If you have a higher card mix than you do debit card, they're about 25 basis points higher than most other brands. By and large, no matter how much you're selling, how many gallons you're selling, if you care about card value, Marathon, Citgo, and Valero have the lowest fees with a difference of over $60,000 than other brands on a 10-year contract. So if you're selling way more than 60,000 gallons, or you're doing way more than $150,000, that number's those savings are gonna increase significantly. Pass-through wins. A store with an average of 60,000 gallons per month can save over $100,000 in processing fees with a competitive interchange plus program, and that's carried out over the value of a branded contract, so 10 years roughly. So we built a calculator for this whole part. We hope to eventually put this within the next 3 months or so, to put this calculator on our website so you can go do it on your own. But if you're in that phase right now where you're considering brands and you want to consider how much you want to compare two different brands to each other with card fees, and you have your store metrics, we can plug that into the calculator and help you see the potential difference in savings there. Okay, moving on.
Real quick question on that, Casey. So let's suppose I'm brand, pick a brand, BP, what have you. Other than changing brands at the expiration of my contract, is there anything that I can do as a retailer?
As a retailer, if you are signed up with a brand, you are stuck with their branded fee program. So you must use their program. They don't even want you inside a C store using an alternative network. The most important thing you could do if you're branded and you're taking advantage of all the branded programs, is you should push their loyalty cards, because their loyalty cards, either their fleet cards or their loyalty cards, though they're a low penetration, you're not getting a lot of people to sign up for those cards. They don't charge any fees to you, the retailer. So if you're just recently signed up with a brand and you pay attention to your effective rate, you want to encourage as much loyalty to that brand as you can to reduce your overall credit card fee. So that's the most practical lever you can pull there to keep your fees lower.
Thank you.
Okay, takeaway number 3, e-commerce for your commercial fuels and home heating oil. So most of what we talk about here is what's happening at the C-store, but there's a lot of you fuel suppliers. You might have some house accounts. You might have some sort of house program that you're manually keeping things, and you're allowing people to still pay by check for whatever case. How many times have you heard the check is in the mail, or we mailed it, or I don't know why it got to you, but we sent it? You know, that particular concept is such a headache for folks that when you think about, well, we want to keep taking checks and cash because that's free, we don't have to pay processing fees. The reality is free often means that the true cost hasn't been quantified of what that taking a check payment is. So the things that are built into that most people aren't factoring are labor cost, potential mistakes being made either from the check writer, the check sender, or with the mail, or the person making deposits, or the person hand keying in the payment amount. And you consider long overdue payments or bad debt. Especially if you consider bad debt, what's more painful to you as an organization, never collecting at all or paying the processing fee? There are better options that are available to now. Some of you may already be doing this. Some of you may be considering it. And I want to give you 2 different ways to consider online processing for some of your commercial fuels or some of your house accounts. One is e-commerce methods of payment, and 2 ways to reduce fees and to clarify some misconceptions. So the first one we want to look at is alternative online payment services. So we all know paying online with a credit card is expensive, and some of us may be already incorporating ACH, but there are new programs within the last couple of years and new programs that are about to roll out. The first one I want to talk about is RTP, or real-time payments. This was created by the Clearinghouse in 2017, same people who run the ACH program, and it's operated by conglomerate banks. What are the fee programs? It does kind of vary. There's not really specific there, but there are a lot of pros to traditional forms of payment. One is an instant payment, kind of like Zelle would be. 2, you practically eliminate your returns, which are a problem when it comes to either chargebacks with credit cards or returns on ACH. And the third one is you do get $1 million limit. So it's a very high limit, which is helpful in the bulk fuel space as you sell that. The cons are it's not readily available on most gateways. And that may mean nothing to you, but to the team that does your development or the company you use to build your portal. They use a gateway, which is basically the online version of a point of sale, to build to these different services, and real-time payments are not readily available, so it's kind of hard to get to right now. The other piece is when the developer builds to a gateway that does support real-time payments, often it doesn't support other payment methods like credit cards or ACH. So if you go that route, you kind of are stuck with just that route. The use cases for this are business to business and business to consumer. So take an example, a business pays a vendor instantly. The second option is ACH. You should all be familiar with this. It's the most common method for online payments behind debit and credit. It grew 8% over the last 3 years. An interesting fact is debit cards and ACH cards are the only 2 traditional payment methods that have grown in the last 3 years. cash, checks, and credit card use has declined to alternative programs like Venmo, PayPal, or Zelle. Fee programs, you've seen these before. Fee programs, you can pay a flat fee, a percentage fee, or even a capped fee. So if you have larger transactions, you're not paying a 1% fee for a $100,000 transaction. You can cap that fee at a much lower amount. The pros for this are it's readily available and it's less expensive for cards, and they work on all the common gateways. The cons are slow settlement, which you're all familiar with, 3 to 5 days a lot of times, and returns are a pain. Now, new ACH features that have been rolled out in the last couple of years to compete with the new services are next day ACH, same day ACH, and level 2 processing, which essentially means gather more information for the transaction, so it reduces the likelihood of a return. The third program you may have seen in the news in the last couple of months is the FedNow program. It's going to be launched in July 2023, so just a couple months down the road, and it's operated by the Federal Reserve Bank. Don't know the fee programs yet, but the pros are going to be just kind of like RTP is, instant payments, no returns. They do have a lower limit of $500,000, but it's still, for most cases, it's going to be more than enough. The cons are it's going to take a while for it to roll out. The use cases are business to business, business to consumer, and peer to peer. So an example of this would be a trucking company paying a driver at the end of the shift. One interesting thing about the FedNow program, it's been kicked around, is potentially is the IRS going to be paying tax returns back from it. If that is the case, at some point there could be mass adoption of the FedNow program, which would make it easier for businesses and peer-to-peer payments switch very quickly. So those are 3 examples of services that are either on the horizon, available to you now, that are faster payment methods, and if you quantify the manual labor of checks, potentially cheaper as well. Now, the next section and the last point we want to make here today is the options to reduce the cost of online processing. So everybody asks about this. It costs so much to process an online transaction. And if you operate C-stores, you're ever in a C-store, you've seen a lot of credit card agents and processors stopping by, pushing the concept of surcharge or quote unquote cash discounting. So I want to dispel some misconceptions on this and provide some clarity here. Words matter in this space, and how you deploy it really matters in this space. And there's a lot of companies that are doing this wrong, which could cost you thousands in penalty fees if it's not administrated correctly. The first thing I want to say is, no, this is not a service charge. The industry recognizes a service charge as unique from these other 2. That is a charge allowed only by government and education institutions. I'm not going to be talking about that today, just focus on convenience fee and surcharge. What is a convenience fee? Convenience fee is simply a fee that's passed on to a customer for the privilege of paying from an alternative method of payment. An example of this would be, we're going to charge you $3 for paying for this bill online versus paying for it in person. So the allowed use cases for this are only when the convenience of paying is different than another payment channel. So you have to have 2 different methods, and all of you should have a face-to-face payment option. So you're not getting kicked out of this option. You can charge it on a credit card, a debit card, or ACH, and you can set different fees for each one of them. You must set a fixed amount too. You cannot do it as a percentage of the sale, and it's allowed in all 50 states. So accept an online payment, you can charge a flat convenience fee, simply put. Prohibited use cases, you cannot use it for face-to-face transactions, you cannot use it for recurring payments, and it cannot be a percentage of the sale. Now, the surcharging is the more common you're beginning to see when you go to a restaurant, places like that. Some people even call it cash discounting, which is a misnomer because you're not actually getting a cash discount. You're charging more for using a credit card. A surcharge is a fee percentage charged to a customer to cover the fees associated with the transaction. Example, 3% fees added to a sale for paying with a Visa credit card. You can use the ways you can use this are you can use it with a Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express credit card only. The fee must be the same for all card types. That's really, really important. Some people are charging more for an American Express, and that is not allowed. If you get caught with that, you will be penalized by the card company. The other prohibited use cases are you cannot use this method for ACH or debit transactions. It's also not allowed or is heavily restricted in a lot of states. The rules vary by brand, so it's really hard to stay compliant. I would rely on a technology provider to do this and not do an in-house, ad hoc surcharging system. Within the last 30 days, Visa has also updated the fee maximum to 3%. So if you've been paying 4% and you show up somewhere, you need to tell them, hey, the maximum you can charge is 3%. And they do charge a $5,000 fine for the first violation. So those are some ways that you can reduce the cost of online processing, in addition to some ways that you have alternative payment methods online. So with that, that's all I have. We covered questions for your processor. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for that education. And for the audience, we will send out the slide decks for each of our presenters as well as video. I know there's a lot of useful information in here that you may want to reference. Casey, I just have a quick question for you. So PIX, how does your company fit in with Visa, MasterCard, and then also the processors like Heartland and others that are out there? Where does PIX fit in?
That's a good question. We're really a software company that works as a payment facilitator, so we can work with all the different processors. We primarily use in the where 100% of our C-store card present, we use Heartland as our backend. So where we fit in is really we're a software intermediary, so we can bypass a lot of those. You have to sign a contract to get a low rate or the complicated fee setup. We're a software partner who onboards our own customers, generates our own statements, and handles our own settlements. And we do unbranded credit card processing with them, not representing any of the brands.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Casey. I really appreciate the education you provided. And Mike Lawshe with Paragon. Just any closing comments? We've only got about 60 seconds left.
Well, it's not surprising that our mantra is do your homework, study on the front end. It's not ready, shoot, aim. It's ready, aim, shoot.
I like it. Ready, aim, shoot. Well, thank you for being on the call. I hope this was valuable time for you. And again, any of our presenters would love to have a visit with you if you have any further questions for them. Everybody, I hope you're enjoying spring. Take care.